month's book review, I'm going to record my review and my thoughts about the book as I read the book. So I feel like I can give a better review of a book if I record my thoughts and feelings right after I read it. So for this review, I have just 3 books that rounded out my February reads. All 3 of these books I picked up from my local library. 2 of them were new releases late last year, and 1 is an older book. I talked about 2 of them in my previous review, and 1 I have since picked up from the library. I've read no new books from my to-be-read shelf for this review. I've decided not to go to the library again until I get some of these books that are on my shelf read, since that was the whole point of this year. And I will list the books that I am planning to read for the next month at the end of this review. Starting with Bookshop of Yesterdays. This is a 364-page book. It took me 2 days to read this, and I really enjoyed this book. I felt that it was just a nice, gentle story. It wasn't packed with action, it wasn't packed with mystery, but it was just a really nice story to read. This book is by Amy Meyerson, and this is her debut novel. The premise of the book is this girl, I think she's in her late 20s, is sent on a literary scavenger hunt by her uncle who is recently deceased. He leaves clues in various books around the bookshop that he owned. It leads her to a truth about her family that she didn't know before. I don't want to spoil the ending. I feel that this book would make a really good vacation read or weekend read. If you're just looking for a nice, easy story, then I would recommend giving this one a try. Especially for people who really like books and for people who understand classic literary references, I think this would make a really good book for them. The next book that I wanted to share was this 384-page book by Louise Penny. This is called Kingdom of the Blind. This is the 14th book that Louise Penny has written, and they're all about Inspector Armand Gamache. This is a series that I never really would have picked up. I am not usually a fan of the mystery genre of writing. I first picked up one of this series a couple of years ago, not really knowing what to expect. And when I found out that it was a part of an ongoing series, I went back and read them from the beginning. One of my favorite things to find is good Canadian writers who write about things that happen in Canada. And this is one of those books. Louise Penny is Canadian. She lives east of Montreal in Quebec, which is in eastern Canada. And I also live in Canada, so I just love finding Canadian authors that I can read and I can support and I can promote them as well. This is a great book. As I said before, I'm not usually a mystery lover, but these books I really enjoyed right from the very first one. There's a lot of really cool things in this book that are like uniquely Canadian things, words that you probably won't even recognize, things that are just kind of Canadian culture things, which I think is really fun. I love reading about stuff like that because it makes total sense to me as I read it. It might not make sense to someone who doesn't spend a lot of time with Canadians or isn't from Canada, but I do think this book is worth reading. This is one of the ones that I would probably recommend to just about everybody. There's enough action, there's enough excitement that I think a lot of people would find this book really interesting. The reason I picked this one up at the library was it's a new release from last November, and this is the first book that Louise Penny wrote after the passing of her husband. And I didn't think that there would be any more books from her. I watched an interview with Louise Penny that said that she wasn't even sure she was going to write again. And so I was really excited when this book did come out. I was really excited to pick up and read about it and see what was happening in the village of Three Pines. So overall, this one is definitely a 5-star book in my opinion. This is the book that I would recommend to everybody. I really think you should pick it up, Canadian or not. If you can find this book in your neighborhood bookstore or your library, I feel like that a lot of people would really enjoy this book. Highly, highly recommend this one. I just finished reading Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. Not to be confused with The Wild, starring Reese Witherspoon. Different book. This book was first published in 1996. So it's a bit of an older book, but it is a captivating story. At just 203 pages, this is a fast read. It's a small book. It didn't take very long to get through it. The story told in this book, however, is a true story. This is the story of a young man in his early 20s who went off in search of adventure and it ended up costing him his life. The author does a very good job at staying neutral and non-judgmental about what happened or may have happened during this boy's adventure. As I said in the previous vlog, that Jon Krakauer's writings are a lot more like investigative journalism. So he's taking real stories and putting them into a book for people to read. This is a high quality story, very high caliber writing, and I think everyone would enjoy reading this book. I recommend this to just about anyone. You don't have to be a wild adventurer to enjoy a story like this. The book is about a boy named Chris McCandles, and at the end of the story there is still some details that are not clear, some questions left unanswered, as this boy was alone when he perished in the wild. I do think that this book is a valuable read. I think this is a book that could have quite the impact on a person. It had an impact on me. I have read Jon Krakauer before. I read his book called Into Thin Air, and that is a story that inspired the movie Everest that I mentioned in the previous vlog. So I also recommend maybe picking up that book and giving that one a try as well. I was thinking about the books to read for this next month, and I don't have them all chosen yet. I don't like to plan my book reading out too specifically. Generally what I do is I stare at my to-be-read shelf until one of the books kind of calls out to me. I've picked 2 books to read during the month of March so far. What? The first one I'm going to read is this one by Jen Sincero. I really enjoyed the first book of this. If you haven't read the first one of this, run and get it because it's very good. I'm excited to see where it goes in the second book. The other book that I'm going to read this month is one that the Mister actually had picked up at the bookstore and read and liked, and so I'm stealing it because I also want to read it. This wasn't originally on my to-be-read shelf for 2019, but it's been added. So this is The Last Name Sarah. This is a debut novel as well. I've been reading a lot of those lately. I didn't know when the Mister was reading this book that this person is actually Canadian as well, or she lives in Canada now. She lives way out on the far, far east coast of Newfoundland. That just makes me want to read this book even more because she's Canadian. I don't know how to pronounce her name, so if I say this totally wrong, Kristen Cicerelli, maybe? Kristen Cicerelli, is that how you pronounce his name? I'm not positive. He really enjoyed this book, so I'm really interested to see what it's all about. So this is the second book that I've chosen to read in March. And I'm sure there'll be more than 2. I'm just not sure what else is going to come. But as I figure out what I'm going to be reading, I'll be sure to share those. Thanks for taking time to watch the book review rounding out my February reads. I'm excited to get into March and to start reading some of the other books that I have on my shelf. Look for the March book review on the first Saturday in April. As always, give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below recommending any books that you found recently that you've really enjoyed reading.